Je démarre.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for the Mutandis presentation of the first half of 2021. In a nutshell, what to keep in mind, we had flat sales over the first half, but definitely a slight decline on margins. We had a much better Q2 than Q1, and Q2 was up versus 2020 in revenues, EBITDA, and net income. We kept the dividend stable at 8.5 dirhams per share, same level as last year. And finally, keep in mind that we finalized the acquisition of the leading high-end sardine brand in the US, which is Season. And Season joined Mutandis since August 1st, as the deal was closed on July 30 of 2021. So flat sales, decline margins, better Q2 than Q1, stable dividend, and Season. If we focus on EBITDA and net income, so flat revenues meant a slight loss in EBITDA of 6 million dirhams, 5% of EBITDA, and this is really due to higher raw material costs. Internationally speaking, as you know, transportation costs are higher, container costs are higher. Everything has completely zoomed upwards, including chemicals for detergents, including edible oil for the sardine cans, including, so most of our raw materials are sharply higher in 2021 versus 2020. That was absolutely unexpected on a global basis, as you know, and it is due to imbalances created by the post-COVID rebound of the global economies. That same loss of that same decline of 6 million dirham in EBITDA can be found again in recurring net income and net income about that, because the rest of the expenses and revenues do offset each other between depreciation, amortization, and financial costs. The net debt is higher from 318 a year ago to 391 at June 2021. That is due to the acquisition of a piece of land, very large piece of land, to build our 3 new factories close to Casablanca. That is also due to the contribution to the COVID fund, the government COVID fund in 2020, that's last year. And that is also due to the fact that we have a slightly higher inventory of PET as of June, as we should have. But that will be back to normal at the end of the year. Capital expenditure was 33 million versus 44 million, a decline of 25% over the first semester. If we take a broader look at 2018 to 2021 period, then you can see that 2019 was a pretty good year, pretty normal year for us, 6% growth in revenues. And then we had the COVID, and then we had the first year post-COVID, so where we are managing more or less to keep revenues flat. And that is also due to the fact that we have 4 very different categories of products. And so the categories that were strong in 2020 are weaker in 2021 and vice versa. So we have a very good balance between the 4 categories in 2020 and 2021. And it's thanks to that diversification of categories that we are managing to keep revenues flat over the first semester. Look at EBITDA, it's more or less the same story, except in 2021, where we are back to slightly lower than 2019, and that's due to raw materials and transportation costs, as was said before. If we look at each category, you can see very clearly here that if home care and the bottle business, home care and the seafood sardine can business were lower in the first half, that was exactly offset by everything that's related to drinks. I'll explain that a little bit later in the presentation and comment on it more specifically, but just suffice to say that the two large categories were down, the two smaller categories were sharply up, and that was exact. Same story for the EBITDA breakdown. Contribution of EBITDA of home care and season and sardine cans was lower. And the drinks business, bottles, drinks are significantly higher in contribution. Beware that the contribution in first half of the seafood business is always small versus the full year contribution, because January, February, March are months where we cannot fish. They're very small catches, and it's not the high season for the catches. And usually the boats are in maintenance in winter months. So that's the way EBITDA is breaks down for the semester, for the first half. And again, it's, the decline is due to the raw material prices. We managed to partly offset the decline in variable margins or margins and variable costs with lower fixed costs, especially on wages. We did significant cost cutting in wages, and that's positive to almost entirely offset the decline in margins. If we zoom on home care and detergents, first of all, our figures more or less depict the whole Moroccan market situation, as our market share was more or less stable over the first semester. It was slightly higher in the largest category, which is the hand powder, and it was slightly lower in the liquids, which is bleach and dishwashing liquids. So higher on powder, which is the largest category, lower on liquids, and overall flat market shares. So what we see is really a decline of the Moroccan market in the first quarter, sharp decline in the first quarter, because it was minus 17 or minus 15%, was also due to heavy rains in the countryside, and the non-urban population is 40% of the population in Morocco. So where you have extremely heavy rains in January and floods in February, then you don't have the souks, which are the weekly markets where we can sell the products to the non-urban population. Then the second quarter was better, sequentially better. It was minus 7 versus the minus 17 in the first quarter. And the minus 7 included a plus 2% in the main category, which is the powder. So you could say that the comparisons, quarter-to-quarter comparisons, are getting slightly, gradually back to normal and to some kind of growth by the end of 2021. Second reason why the comparison is not flattering is that in 2020, it was just amazing how there was stockpiling in March at the lockdown announcement, and then incredible use of bleach in the 3 months of the lockdown, because the government used to use bleach to clean the street and clean the public facilities, etc. Then here we have an impact on margins of the sharp increase in raw material and transportation, as I said, and lower fixed costs. But that's true everywhere. If we look at sardine cans and seafood, situation is slightly different here. The demand is strong worldwide, or at least steady. And at the same time, we have two types of sardine catches. We have the sardine that we fish ourselves from the very south of Morocco, which is a big fat sardine used to do skinless, boneless, upscale products. And then there is a slightly smaller, thinner sardine, which is further north in Morocco, and that we don't fish ourselves, which we buy from small coastal fishermen. That second one, the small one, the coastal fishermen fishing, that did not come back from winter month in May, as it usually is the case. It only came back by mid-August. So for at least 3 months, 4 months, we did suffer from lack of smaller sardine used for the more traditional cans, the lower end cans, and the European cans. And that represents usually half of our fish supply in any given year. The other half being the fat sardine that we fish ourselves. So for our own vessel catches, we're good. We're up 8% for the 2 vessels and up 23% because we managed to rent a third vessel. But for the other half of our supply, we are in bad shape, or we've been in bad shape between May and mid-August. So at the end of the day, we did produce less and we did sell less, as our inventories of finished products are more or less completely depleted. Total sales are down 11%, thanks to byproduct sales, as our catches, our own catches were good. We're up 23% in the south of Morocco. So our byproduct sales, which is the fish we don't use, we can't use, is up 23%. But we also are facing lower margins because of raw materials, namely oil prices, edible oil prices. Sunflower and soy oil prices are sharply up. Transportation is sharply up, as we are an exporter. The Moroccan currency is very strong. It's at the very top end of the allowed range by the central bank. That's not good for us either. And so we're trying to offset that, and we've been lowering fixed costs. If you look at the drinks business, then it's a completely opposite situation. The beverage bottle business is up almost 80% in revenues. Some of it is volume and some of it is sharp PET price increase, which we are allowed to completely pass through to our consumers. And it's also driven not only by PET price, but it's driven by the return to a more normal life. You know, this category had suffered a lot in Q2 2020 from hotel closures, restaurants, bars, the disappearance of out-of-home consumption, and Morocco did close its foreign borders almost entirely. No tourism, you have to realize that the population of Morocco increases maybe by 5-6 million inhabitants more between May and September. And we didn't get those guys last year, and we are starting to get some of them, namely the Moroccans established abroad and who come every summer back to Morocco. So in 2021 was the case, 2020 was not the case, was forbidden. The boundaries were closed, the air traffic was shut down. And so the return to normal is increasing volumes for all types of drinks, as you can imagine. We also benefited from favorable PET inventories, meaning that we had a good inventory in late 2020. And so when PET prices went up, we could pass them through the final consumers, whereas we had a favorable PET inventory purchase price. Same dynamics for the juice and beverage business. Own brands at 12%. That's pulled by the low-priced pulp beverage, which is not really a juice, it's a drink based on fruits. And Vita Kids is the kids' drink, and that's pulled by the return to normal life and the back to school by the second quarter, I'd say, versus the second quarter of 2020. Obviously, airlines traffic is still below, still down 30% versus H1 2020 because of the first quarter of 2020, which was absolutely strong. But that's offset because we are enlarging our distribution base worldwide. thanks to the synergies we have with the sardine can exports. So total revenues up about 15% over the semester, with a sharply higher EBITDA, but on small figures. So if we look at net income, you'll find exactly the same difference, which is about 6 million dirhams in difference. EBITDA down 5, D&A down 2, financial expense up 3, less financial expenses by 3 million, higher corporate tax by 1 million, and at the end we have a direct repercussion of the lower EBITDA. If that's true for recurring net income, and that's true for overall net income, there's no big difference this time. It's mostly a mark-to-market revaluation of pieces of land and shares held on the first semester, and also a provision for future tax audits or tax risks, as we say, giving the difference between recurring net income and non-recurring net income. Let me focus a little bit on the major event of the first semester, which is the Season brand acquisition in the US. For us, it is a major entrance in the US market, which is a great market. I'll come back to that later. And it's really the best way to enter the markets. Season is exactly a century old this year. Is a high-end sardine brand. They almost do not sell low-end products. High-end products are sardine cans starting from $2 per can upwards. We will solidify these figures with consumer studies, but probably about 40% market share nationwide of high-end sardine market. They're only into sardines, as sardines do represent 90% of their business. And it's an asset-light company. They own no factory, they own the brand, they own the relationship with the retailers, the Walmarts, the Whole Food Markets, the Kroger, the Safeways, ShopRite, and especially Costco Wholesale Club, their main distribution channel. And the logistics are completely outsourced. Here you can see some of the products in the product range of the company, but you can have them in the website seasonproducts.com. Why did we do this acquisition? First of all, we are always trying to increase the B2C percentage revenues in our total revenues. B2B is tender with supermarket chains under their own brands in the European markets. And B2C is a business model where we're more comfortable because we do the pricing, we watch competition, we talk to the consumer, and we set our prices as a brand, and it's part of our expertise. Whereas B2B is a raw competition between producers. Second reason why is because the US market is a high margin market, better than Africa, better than Western Europe. And this market is dominated by Moroccan producers in the high end, which is the skinless, boneless category, and Mutandis was absent from that market. So we've been trying to enter the US market in between 2016 2018, identified a first customer in 2019, started selling in 2020, had some good order book for 2021, but then came the Season acquisition, which is really the best royal way to enter the US market. Leading brand, high-end product. And as we said initially last June, when we announced this acquisition, Season brand is about $480 million in revenues per year, 60 million in EBITDA, and 45 million in net income. So it's a significant addition to our portfolio of brands. Let me finish with the guidance. Whenever we can provide the market with a quantitative guidance with figures, we do it. But this time there is such an incredible volatility in raw materials and container and freight costs that it's really not prudent to provide with a quantified guidance at this stage that we would have to keep on changing all the time. So just let me give you some qualitative ideas of how the year looks like. Consolidated revenues will be significantly higher over the year, including the 5-month season brand acquisition integration from August 1st to December 31st. On the other hand, as I repeatedly said, the incredibly sharp increase in raw materials, in chemicals for home cares, in edible oil for sardines, in tin plate prices for the empty cans, in container and transportation costs are all hitting our margins, our gross margins, our margins on variable costs, and we cannot reflect them immediately in our selling prices to the consumer. Let's make a difference. For export markets and for the sardine can business, we have decided to increase our prices, and we are implementing it now. We are negotiating with various distributors worldwide and trying to see what type of percentage increase we can add to each market and each product. So that will be done gradually over time. In the Moroccan market, the decision has not been made yet, and we are studying which category, in principle, we can increase prices without losing market share. So that is being done now, and if we make the decisions, we will implement in the fourth quarter of 2021. Even if we implement in the fourth quarter, you will have gradual price increases in 2021 and 2022, except if raw material volatility abates and if sharply higher raw material prices come gradually back to a more normal average price that we've been witnessing over the last decade. Consequently, margins will be significantly lower in the second half and will be lower over the whole year. And so that's how the year looks like. I hope it was useful and clear as a comment for the first half. And if should you have any questions, do not hesitate to send emails as is usually the case. Thank you very much for your attention.